And welcome to Livid Ladies, the podcast.
This is Jane.
And this is Julie. And today we're going to tackle a pretty big subject. We're going to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, police brutality, just some of the racial tension, and what's been going on in the news lately. And we should mention, too, that we're recording this on August 28th, 2020. So we know that, by the time this episode comes out, things will probably have changed. More details will probably come out. Other events will be happening. But we do kind of want to get our thoughts out on what's going on right now. This has been really heavy on both our hearts. So we just wanted to create some space to talk about it today.
Yeah, and when we talked about doing this episode and talking about this subject, I was feeling kind of weird and guilty because I really struggle to um, bear the pain and rage of reading about what's happened in detail and in depth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that you, Julie, made a good point that we don't really have the time to educate ourselves to the point that we would really like to be. We're constantly trying to learn, but this is happening right now, and we need to talk about it right now. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always going to be more to learn. And I don't think I'm ever going to feel 100% good about where I'm at in terms of my own work that I have to do on this topic. So, but yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important to just talk about it, get it out there. I think the whole point, or one of the reasons Black Lives Matter is picking up so much steam is because people are realizing we need to have these conversations.
Yeah.
So yeah, where do you want to start? It's a huge topic.
Oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. Well, one thing I want to say is I didn't even realize sort of the systemic racism that is happening in our country. Honestly, probably really until George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
And watching the film Just Mercy.
Mm.
Um, and I've also watched a couple of documentaries recently too. I've been trying to educate myself more. Um, but it's so ingrained in our society and sort of into the fabric of our country in a way that I wasn't taught and didn't look at um, really until now, until super
Yeah.
recently, the last few months. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that probably, but it's really hard to admit that
Mm-hmm.
I am racist. I have um, the same kind of, microaggression, sort of subliminal, what's the term I'm looking for? Um,
Like unconscious or
yeah,
implicit
yeah.
bias.
Implicit bias, exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes me angry and upset to think of myself that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's really pointing out a huge flaw
Mm-hmm.
in our society as a whole. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess we should also mention, too, I mean, I'm sure people who are listening will probably already know kind of the backdrop of what's going on. But we had the killing of George Floyd, a Black man, um, back was that the end of May when it happened? I
I want
think
to
it was.
say, yeah.
Yeah, so first we had him, and he was in the news, and he was killed by a police officer kneeling on his neck. And just recently had the shooting of Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back by a police
In
officer
front of his
um,
children.
in front of his 3 children. Um, yeah, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And so this is kind of what prompted Jane and I to have some of these conversations with each other. And I agree with you, Jane. I think as much as I would like to think that I am an open and, you know, passionate advocate of social justice and racial equality, I really don't think I started coming to terms with my own implicit biases and my own racism, my own privilege until the killing of George Floyd. And I think part of the reason why that happened is because, or part of the reason why it took so to really take a good look at myself, um, is just because I've always thought of myself as like an open person, um, a good person, an activist, and I never really stopped to think like, okay, how am I contributing to what's going on in our society? How am I contributing to systemic racism? And I feel like once people started talking about George Floyd, and I started following people on social media who I hadn't followed before, like that's when I really got the chance to sit down and think about my own um, just my own role in all of this. I don't know about you. Why do you think it took you a while to get to this point where you are at now?
I think it's incredibly uncomfortable to look at, and it's it's hard because you don't want to think of yourself in that way. You don't want to admit that you have privilege or you have a leg up. Like, I think a lot of people are like, no, I grew up poor, I struggled,
Mm-hmm.
I'm self-made, all of those things. But um, it's sort of selfish to not think about the other people and minorities in your community who have it way harder, you know. Um,
Yeah.
uh, so I think it's just a super uncomfortable conversation. I think it's sort of a social taboo to bring it up in conversation. I think
Mm-hmm.
that you have to be like really close with somebody and really trust them, like your significant other or like your best friend who knows everything about you and who will give you the benefit of the doubt to even open the door to that conversation. That's how
Yeah.
uncomfortable it is. Um, I had an experience um, that was really new for me where I was the minority in a room. I was the one of the only white people at a party, and I had the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to go to this party because my husband was coaching football at the time. Um,
And this was pre-COVID,
Pre-COVID.
just before anybody freaks
Don't
out.
don't freak out. This was not recent. It was pre-pandemic. I went to this party. It was primarily people of color. It was at a person of color's house, and their entire family was there. They had a big barbecue. Just the cultural difference of like how a black family threw that party versus how other parties I've been to and how I would throw one was a new experience. And then it was also just mind-blowing to me how uncomfortable I was. I was so out of my element, like I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know where to look. I didn't yeah, I so
Mm-hmm.
just so uncomfortable. I clung to my husband like, he was the only person there, I mean? Um
Yeah.
and I tried to kind of talk about that experience with a group of friends. I went to a bachelorette weekend not long after that, and I brought it up. And the response was super weird. Like, I felt like they were turning it on me, that like they made me feel racist for wanting to talk about it. Um,
Mm.
I think it made everyone really uncomfortable, and nobody knew how to sort of address that. And I didn't feel like they were giving me the benefit of the doubt. So, and then I got really insecure, and I felt like I had said the wrong
Yeah.
thing or that I had kind of stepped in it. Um, but that
Yeah.
that feeling, like sort of what I'm trying to describe, is like I think that's why people don't want to have these conversations.
Yes. I totally agree. And we should mention too, the bachelorette party wasn't mostly white
It was
women.
all white women. Yes.
Okay, it was all white women, and you're trying to have this conversation with them about this experience you had. And it sounds to me like your intent was to have an honest conversation and kind of unpack what it was that made that experience so uncomfortable for you. Like, am I right in
Yeah,
saying
I was
that?
trying to kind of process it and honestly like look at my own discomfort and sort of see like what other people's take on that was, or if anybody had any insight or similar experiences. Like I just wanted to talk about it. I was sort of
Yes.
fascinated. I never really it didn't occur to me basically until then, or at least not for a long time. It hadn't occurred to me. You know, how different that was, and I didn't experience that
Hmm.
feeling literally ever. And that sort of, goes to show too that like, you know, when you get sort of comfortable in your own social circle, in your world and your life, um, you don't always think about the bigger picture. Um,
Yeah.
one thing
Yeah.
that I saw, oh my gosh, what was this documentary called? I'll have to look it up. But I watched this documentary on social justice and sort of like the history of racism in our country, and it pointed out how a lot of presidents started preaching this like law and order um,
Hmm.
mentality and really hitting that point as a huge like campaign promise. Um, and what that really meant was that a disproportionate amount of people of color ended up behind bars. That was like the result of this like law and order push. Um,
Yep.
but what I found to be fascinating was that we assume if somebody is being pulled over or somebody is being searched or detained, that they must have done something wrong, right? That you
Hmm.
you just assume that because the alternative is crazy, right? Like you think about
Absolutely.
the police are there to serve and protect. They're somebody you can call when you have a problem. They're supposed to be on your side. They're supposed to help you in a dangerous situation and make you feel more comfortable and that kind of thing. Um, but what we're not realizing is that people of color are being detained and pushed up against walls and stuff like every day for like no good reason. And at a certain point,
Right.
when you push people like that every day, what happens, right? So that you're
Absolutely. Yeah.
creating this environment where you push people to the point where they're like, you know what, fine, it doesn't matter. I'm not doing anything anyway. So fine, I'll give
Hmm.
you something to do, or I'll give you a reason, or like it pushes you in a way that we don't have any experience with that, right? Like I've
No.
never even gotten a speeding ticket, knock on wood.
No. Wow, I'm impressed. Yeah, that's such a good point. I feel like exactly, like we've never had that experience. Like we don't know what that's like to constantly get this pushback from people, to be looked at a certain way, to be treated a certain way simply because of the color of your skin. I mean, we don't have that experience in America because we're both white women. And I'm imagining that if I was in, a black man's shoes, I would probably honestly snap. Like I would probably be so pissed. I would just snap. Like, and I think that's kind of what's happening with some people, is like they are so sick and tired of it that they're just
But they're
snapping.
also not being given the benefit of the doubt. So, like with Jacob Blake,
Yes.
um, whatever the reason was for detaining him, and I think he did have some priors or whatever the situation
Right.
was, um, it doesn't warrant 7 shots to the back because he
In
didn't
front of your
follow a
children.
command.
Yep.
It's insane to me. Like I would almost, and I'm really not saying this, but just as like a hypothetical, like I would almost understand like a warning shot or something. Like at least that would be a little bit more justifiable. But 7? What's the point
Yeah.
of the 6 bullets that happened after the first one? You know what I'm saying?
No idea. Yeah, absolutely. I just don't, first of all, I just don't understand the use of force in general, unless it's like in very select few instances. And even then, I'm like, why can't you? I mean, let's say somebody's charging at you, and let's say they have a gun, right? I don't know, maybe shoot them in the leg to like disarm them, or shoot them in the arm or something. I literally have never understood the excessive like shot after shot after shot, and especially in people's
Right.
backs. Like black men have been getting shot in the back for so long, and I just don't understand that mentality at all. And I honestly, like, sometimes I'm just like, is there anything to understand there? Like it's so ridiculous. I don't even think there's anything to
Well,
understand
and
there.
also the threat is not existent. There was no gun, there was no knife. He's like, "Oh, he had a knife in the car." Okay, fine, but like what you're saying is you weren't being presented
Hmm.
with a weapon. The police officers were not like, "Oh shit, he's armed." Like there was no like, "Oh shit, he's armed, he's going to kill us. We have to defend ourselves." That was not the situation. They
Right.
shot him 7 times in the back as he was reaching into his car. And yeah, fine, whatever. Worst case scenario, maybe he was reaching for a weapon, but the fact remains that that's an insane response. And I think it's just factually true that if Jacob Blake was a white man,
Mhm.
he would not have been shot. Like, end of
Yes.
story. And that's the
Yep.
exact problem that seems so simple, but yet people are just like losing their minds over this and arguing it and
Hmm.
defending it. I'm just like,
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at like statistics this morning in preparation for this episode, and there are stats out there that literally just say like, yes, there are more white people getting shot by police officers by number, like by volume, but there are more white people in the United States of America than there are black people. And when you look at the rates, like when you look at the percentage of people who are white who are getting shot and killed by police versus black people who are getting shot and killed by police, like the rate is so much higher. I'm going to pull up one of these stats really quick so I can read it to you. So this is from an article. It's on the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, PNAS.org. And the article is called Risk of Being Killed by Police Use of Force in the United States by Age, Race, Ethnicity, and Sex. And it says here on their abstract that about 1 in every 1,000 Black men can expect to be killed by police. And risk of being killed by police peaks between the ages of 20 and 30 years old for men and women for all racial and ethnic groups. But if you're a Black person and also Hispanic and American Indian, you are much more likely than a white person to be shot and killed by police. And I can't remember what the rates were. But it's just, there's research out on this, and I don't understand. There was like an article that came out a while ago that Trump, I think he quoted it and said just like, there are more white people being shot and killed by police than Black people. And the problem with that article is that it does not mention the fact that they didn't look at rates, and there are way more white people in this country than there are Black people. So the fact that Black people are getting shot at the rate that they're getting shot as is absolutely despicable, and it shows you right there that there's a problem in our society. And so I don't understand the argument of like, well, I just don't understand the arguments of people who are arguing against this issue, like people who are trying to basically say that it's not an issue. I don't understand that at all.
yeah, I mean, those statistics are honestly shocking. And I mean, listen, Julie, like the facts are there. The research has been done.
Yeah.
We know this. Um, it's the level of denial. It's a human condition with any quote unquote controversial issue. Like
Mm-hmm.
um global warming, climate change.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
facts are there, and yet there's still people that um, think it's a hoax or
Yeah.
whatever. Um, Same with
Yes. No,
coronavirus.
you're so right.
Coronavirus. People are clearly dying in at a rate that is worse than anything we've seen since the
Right.
Spanish flu, whatever. And people just refuse to accept it. I mean, we're talking about cold, hard facts. The research is there.
Yeah.
We're talking about science. We're talking about things that we know to be true.
Yeah.
Um, and yet, how is it that there's this whole faction of people who just deny that this is happening and just return to this rhetoric of like, well, I have, the right to protect myself with a gun, or
Mm-hmm.
he must have done something, or um,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost wonder if like some of this denial is just comes from fear and um a desire to hold on to, power, whatever that power might be. Um, like I just think of, I mean, white people have been kind of running things for a very long time around here, and now we're having to look at ourselves and look at our society, the society which has been built on, Black and brown people's backs. And we have to basically contend with the fact that we've been complicit with all of this. And I think it's just hard to admit that. And I think people are scared to admit that because there are so many implications. Like once you say, yes, this is how it is, things need to change and your life needs to change. And you might lose some power and privilege that you've been, holding on to.
Right. And nobody
I
wants
don't
to
know.
let go of their privilege. People like
Yeah.
having a leg up. I
Yeah.
also think there's a huge piece of this is the lack of education because
Hmm.
I firsthand, like I would raise my hand, like I did not know a lot of stuff about the history of our country or just understand the concept of systemic racism and implicit bias. I truly didn't get it. I truly didn't know. The
Me
term
neither.
white privilege was mystifying to me
Hmm.
even like a year ago, you know? And I'm
Yes.
almost 30 years old. Like, and I'm interested
No,
and I'm
same.
interested in this. And I consider
Yeah.
myself to be a liberal. You know, I vote,
Yes.
you know, for the Democratic Party. Like I consider myself to be progressive. So like that I think is, you know, I just think there's a lot of people out there like me who really didn't look at this or educate themselves. Um I I think too, like we're just not covering the history of our country. This first of all, our country is really young, and this stuff
Hmm.
happened really recently. Like
Yep.
segregation and affirmative action, that was like in
Hmm.
my parents' generation. Like
Hmm.
um all of this stuff that we were looking at, racism never went away. Like our whole country
No.
was built on it, and it's ingrained into the you know the whole way that our country is run. And it just
Yeah.
never ended. It never went away. It's gotten better. Don't get me wrong. Like you know, obviously we don't have slaves. We don't own people anymore. We don't have the whole 3/5 thing anymore. Thank God. But like
Yeah.
it never actually went away. And I think that's really hard to face.
Right.
People just want to be like, oh yeah, racism's over. We fixed that problem. Moving on.
Hmm. Hmm. No, I totally agree with you. And I love what, first of all, I love how honest you're being. And I mean, I can relate to everything you're saying. I love what you said about the education piece. I agree with you. I was not educated on this. And when we did talk about it in school, it was always like a very happy picture of like, look at how horrible these monstrous, white people were back in the 60s. And, we had the civil rights movement and MLK, and now we're all good. Like that was always the picture that was painted in my social studies classes. And yeah, I agree with you. I think it wasn't until this year that I really started like, all right, I need to sit down and like read about this stuff. Like I need to sit down and listen to podcasts about this because I really don't know what's going on. And it's such a complex, convoluted issue, and it's been going on for so long, and there are so many different pieces to it that, I mean, you really can't be educated on this in one course, right? In one class. And I guess I'm curious about what it was like for you growing up, talking about race. Did you guys talk about race in your family? What did that look like? What did you think about race? When did you become aware of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was homeschooled, and I was homeschooled all the way through. The first time I ever went to um, a formal school was in college. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think this is sort of where the gaps in my education start to show. So like I didn't have a history curriculum that I followed super well. And I think the ones that I
Yeah.
did were probably pretty racist. Um,
Mm-hmm.
very conservative. My parents used a lot of like Christian curriculum. Um, I don't remember ever having a talk. You know, like I've seen in movies now, you know, they'll show like a family of color and they'll show the father figure explaining to his kids how they should put their hands on the dashboard and stuff if they were ever to be pulled over. Um,
Yeah.
that was shocking to me. I it was never a conversation, it never affected my life. And it was very that was a really kind of unhealthy mindset that I feel that I grew up with, that we
Mm-hmm.
didn't care about things that didn't affect us directly. Um, and I still think my parents have that mindset to this day, and um, it really shows a lack of empathy, I think, and it's something that I
Yeah.
struggle with in like every conversation I have with them about anything, any issue. Um,
Yeah.
because I remember when 9/11 happened, I didn't care. I didn't understand. And granted, fine, yeah, I was like 12 or something, but like or no, 10. But anyway, um I I truly didn't grasp what it meant for our country because they didn't even have the education to understand. And my parents were like,
Mhm.
"Oh yeah, it's really tragic," but they didn't really talk to us about like why. We didn't have a conversation about it really. I remember I was a member of the 4-H club, and we talked about it as a group at one of our meetings. And I didn't know what to say, and I felt really awkward. And I kind of said basically that, and I'm super embarrassed now. Like, I was basically like, well, it doesn't affect my life. So, and I know people who signed up for the military because of that event. Like, it changed people's
Yeah,
lives, obviously. It changed a whole country. And I didn't
right.
understand the implications of that. So, my point of saying that is just that I didn't understand things that didn't affect me directly. Um, I honestly didn't really interact with any people of color until that I can think of because I wasn't in school um,
Mhm.
until I was in like a ballet production, and I wrote in my journal that I made a friend, and she was quote unquote Oriental, and that was a word that my parents taught me to call
Mhm.
people. Um, so I think, I mean, I remember having a really strong feeling of like they're not different than us, right? That I should treat people as equals. Um,
Yeah.
but I never remember having like an official conversation or like education about it. Because we're Orthodox Christians, we definitely came in contact with a lot of people from different countries, but they were mostly Eastern European, so it was very, we're still like, we're still basically talking about white people, right?
Right.
So I interacted with a lot of people from different countries with accents and spoke different languages and ate different food and like all of those things. So that was like pretty normal for me to like respect different cultures.
Mhm.
But I think I very much had the underlying like, oh, that person doesn't look like me. I don't know what to do with that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And you make such a good point about education. Like, if we don't have the vocabulary to speak about this stuff, if we don't even have the concepts, like we can't have these conversations. And I think it's so true that it's like so important to provide individuals with proper education on this. And also, it's up to us as individuals to educate ourselves because the systems aren't going to do it for us.
Right, right. But I'm curious about you, Julie. So I don't know how much you want to share with the public, but you have grown up and actually lived in a couple of different countries in your childhood. How
Yeah.
do you think that affected you? Like, what was that like? What was racism or like the conversation like for you and your
hmm
family and growing up?
hmm Yeah, so I was born in an Eastern European country. Um, a lot of Romani people, like gypsies, lived there. And that was always, there was a lot of tension there with that. Like, they were never treated like our fellow countrymen in the country that I was
Can I
born in.
interrupt really quick?
Um,
So, when you hear the word gypsy, I now kind of think of that as being like derogatory. Is that something that you grew up
mhm.
with too, that that was sort of a bad word or not at all?
You know what? No, I think you're right. I mean, I think it is considered derogatory, and I probably shouldn't use that. I apologize for using that. No, you're right. That was just what the word we used. So I guess it just kind of came out like second nature to
Well, no,
me.
not at all.
Uh,
I think it people from other countries use that word differently, I think. Um, I've
mm,
heard from being Orthodox, I've heard like Serbians use the word gypsy as a way to describe somebody like ethnically.
mm,
I never thought about it as being derogatory until somebody told me that I shouldn't say I got gypped because that was like where
yes, I have heard that. Yeah, I have heard that. No, I think we did use it as an ethnic word. Like, I don't think when we used it, well, I don't know actually. Now I'm trying to think of the word in the language I spoke. Maybe it was really derogatory and I just never realized it because to me it was like, yeah, well, they're lesser than us. So there was that message, that they were lesser than us. They were not like the white people that I grew up with, my white family. There was something wrong with them. And I think yeah, I think that was my first like introduction to race. Like I remember being 4 or 5 years old and being told, like looking at people on the street, like those people are bad. You don't want to associate with those people. Um, so that was probably my first introduction to that. And there's still a lot of issues with that right now in that country. Racial tensions are not good there. But then I moved to an Asian country, and at the time it was very homogenous. It was very nationalistic. I was the only white person probably in my entire city or town that I lived in at the time. Um, and so that was weird for me to be like the minority um, in that instance. And I honestly, I had racial slurs used against me by other kids in my grade. I was told that kids didn't, some of my friends would tell me they can't hang out with me anymore because I'm not like them. So that sucked. Like that really sucked. And I think it really, honestly, I think it still impacts the way I think about myself on a subconscious level. Like I never really felt worthy enough or okay enough to take up space in certain, settings because of that. So that was an interesting experience too. And I distinctly remember when I moved there to that country, like I remember crying at night and wishing that like I could look more Asian. Like I thought if I lived there long enough, somehow my face would start morphing into a more Asian look, and then I could finally like fit in and be okay and be like everyone else. Because at the time, which is funny too, because honestly at the time, like even other Asians who were not from that particular country were treated like absolute trash. So it wasn't just white people. It was like it didn't matter if you looked like everyone else. Like if you happened to nationality of Asian, you were not welcome. So that was interesting too. But I guess that those are my two biggest experiences with race. And then I moved to, well, eventually I made my way to the United States. I moved to Canada before that, but that was much more racially diverse. Like I went to schools that were pretty diverse. And I think at that point I kind of learned like the importance of diversity and the importance of treating people equally and all that. But yeah, those were my experiences.
That's really fascinating. Um, so basically, you know what it feels like to be a true minority person. In a way, like you've sort of been given this gift of like you look white and now you're in a country where you're just everybody treats you like a white person. But you've had this
Mm-hmm.
experience of basically being treated like a person of color in a different country.
Yeah, and I think that this is part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this issue and why I'm willing to look into it and talk about it, is because I know what that feels like. But I don't want you to make me into a saint either, because I'll be very honest with you. For a very long time, once I was treated as a part of the minority or the majority, like once I moved here and I was like white and I passed and I didn't have an accent anymore and I could speak, fluent English, I pretended like I was absolutely from here. I never talked to people about where I was from. I didn't reveal that. I basked in every single privilege and took advantage of every single privilege that came my way. And I think for a very long time, when I started engaging in some discussions about race here in the United States, I would get pretty defensive. And I think part of that was knowing what it feels like to be treated like shit for your race, and not wanting to lose my privilege and my power, my newfound privilege and power that I gained, by assimilating into this culture. Um, so I will tell you, it's very easy to forget what that felt like, or at least not think about it. It's very easy for me to not think about that part of my life because my life is so much easier now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone could blame you though. Why would you not want to have things be easier? I mean, especially because, your life before that was not easy at all. Like who
Yeah.
wouldn't take that advantage, you know?
Yeah, I understand that piece for sure. I guess I just feel kind of guilty that for a long time I didn't even want to engage in this conversation about what was happening with Black lives in the United States because I was comfortable. And I think to me, it almost seems worse that I did that because I went through something that was really, um, just really horrible. And you would think that I would learn from that and be able to empathize with people and engage in these conversations more readily. But there's still a block there for me.
Well, sure, and it's a big battle, and it's a huge fight, and it's not something that I think a lot of individuals feel like they have a lot of control over or power over. I think that people can feel really depressed and helpless, like there's nothing that they personally can really do. And also, once you do educate yourself and you start that
Mm-hmm.
journey and of, learning more about these things, and how you are behaving in your own society, that does come with a certain amount of responsibility. So I why you would feel guilty, because in a way, like, you are more educated than probably the average white person about like what that feels like. So I think that might be where it comes from, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're right.
So that is kind of, this is something I struggle with generally, when I'm faced with these kinds of issues that make me really angry. Um, when you're presented with the facts and people don't see them, I don't even understand why this is happening. It seems
Yeah.
so insane and surreal. Um, what can we do with that?
You read my mind. I was going to ask you the same thing. Um, yeah, that's a really good question. I think, okay, I struggle with a lot of white guilt just in general, and especially when this all started back in May with George Floyd. I struggled with so much white guilt. It was almost debilitating. It was to the point where I was like, I can't do anything. I don't know how to function. I'm horrible. How could I, like, um, how could I basically profit off of other people's suffering? All these thoughts went through my head, and I had a really hard time, and I felt paralyzed by that guilt. But I think what I've been trying to do and what I've learned is that I can work on myself. I can work on educating myself. I can work on unpacking my own white privilege, unpacking my own biases, looking at my own racism in the face, and just making a commitment to not live that way anymore. And it seems like a really small thing to do. And I struggle with this too, because, like, is that enough? Am I doing enough? But I don't see any other way of tackling this than really focusing on myself as an individual, because I can't educate other people. Trust me, I've tried. And I don't necessarily think that I'm the right person to educate other people. I mean, I will speak up for people if I see something going on, and I have spoken up for people if I've seen racism or discrimination. I've stood up for people, but I don't think it's my job to sit down with, let's say, my mother-in-law who makes really racist comments and just like sit her down and educate her on what exactly she should be doing and why she's wrong. I've literally tried that, and it turns into basically a scream fest. So I think what I've decided for myself is that I need to educate myself and figure out what my locus of control is and what I can do within that sphere. And so one of the things that I can do is sit with my clients, who are people of color, and give them space to express themselves. And I tell them, like, I know I'm a white person, and I know I don't have the same experience as you, and I know this might be uncomfortable, but I want to give you the space to talk about it. And I want you to have that opportunity if you want it. I also want you to call me out on things if you feel like if I say things or do things or anything, microaggressions, blatant things, like, just let me know if I do anything like that, and I will try to call myself out on it too. And just doing that, as little and as small as that action may seem, like, it's had a huge impact on my relationship with my clients of color. So I guess my answer to that question is I'm focusing on the things that I can do within my life to make sure that I don't pass on I don't know, the same like racism that I grew up with to, for example, my kids or other people. Um, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's huge, and I think that's all you can really do is speak up. I think you can use your white privilege if you see something. Um, you have more power to stand up to the police. So if something happens in front of your house, you can pull out your phone
Yeah.
and videotape it. One thing that I've been kind of thinking about a lot is what other resources do we have besides the police? For example, if there's like a homeless person who's having like a mental health crisis, like a meltdown of some kind, like who can you call besides the cops? Are
Yes.
there any mental
Yes.
health resources in your community? Um, just doing a little more research and doing a couple quick Google searches can sometimes be the difference between cops responding to a situation that they really are not trained to handle
Mhm.
versus, getting somebody the help that they actually need. And I
That
love
is such a
that
good.
with the Black Lives Matter movement, um, there are actually a lot of lists coming out for um, numbers people can call besides the police. So check
Mhm.
your local like university websites or community resources and see because a lot of
Mhm.
places are starting to do that, and I think that's a really wonderful thing.
That is such a good point. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of those lists too. I think we should maybe put some in the show notes for this episode. Just some general ones. I think there's obviously going to be state specific ones and city specific ones, but we can kind of get that list started for people. Um, but yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, we'll for sure try to link those resources. The other thing is, I mean, if you can spare a few extra bucks, um, I know there's a lot of wonderful places you can donate to. Um,
Hmm.
Gosh, I mean, there's opportunities all over the place, really, like what you can support or withdraw your support from, and just try to make those small changes in your everyday life. I think that and educating yourself and just keep chipping away at it is all we can really do. Um,
Yeah,
and try to maintain a level of hope, which is a big struggle for me because I really struggle, with my depression and stuff to like look at this in the face and not just feel like hopeless about it.
absolutely. Yeah, I can relate to that too. And I like what you're saying about using your dollar too. Like we have the power to speak with our dollar in this capitalist society. We can do a whole lot of damage if enough of us speak up to organizations or products that we feel are not things we should be supporting.
Right, right. Yeah, like supporting the restaurants that are owned by people of color in your neighborhood. Trying to, shop locally. Even if it's just a woman-owned, a female-owned business instead of male-owned. I mean, those things make a difference. Um,
Yes, they really do. Another thing too that I thought of just now that popped in my head, something that I've done, and this was so uncomfortable for me to do, um, is reach out to my friends who are Black, and text them or call them, check in with them. Like I did that when George Floyd happened. I've been doing that now that Jacob Blake's happening, and I'm trying to be better at that. I feel really uncomfortable doing it, to be honest with you. It feels almost weird for me to insert myself and be like, hey, I'm thinking of you, and like, I hope you're doing okay. Please let me know how I can support you. Like, I know this is a really tough time. It just feels, I don't know what it is about it, but it feels really scary and uncomfortable for me. But I'm really trying to push myself to do that because I feel like we need to show, our Black and brown brothers and sisters that like we are with them. And even though we have a lot to learn and we still have a long way to go, like I want to be a source of support for them as they're going through this.
that's amazing. Good for you. What has the response been like? Do you get a response at all, or do you know?
It's actually been pretty good. I do get a response. I mean, people are just kind of like, "Oh my gosh, like thank you for reaching out," or "That's really sweet." I think now a lot more people are doing it, and so it's not, the response isn't as, enthusiastic because everybody's kind of jumping on the bandwagon and every white person is texting their Black friend. Um But no, I mean, it's been a positive response, for sure. So I don't know what it is about me though that like makes me uncomfortable to do that or like scared to do that. But I am glad that I'm trying to push myself to do it more.
Well, yeah, yeah. And I mean, I'm sure they still appreciate it, even if they're getting a lot of text and it's sort of an overwhelming thing. Like, I think it's better to let people know that you support them and you're thinking of them, right? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
absolutely.
I also think something to be careful of is don't lean on your friends of color
Yes.
to educate you or
Yes.
um yeah, like explain, don't put that on them.
Very good point. Yes. I feel like I've seen so many videos of white people asking black people, like, what should I be doing? Or can you tell me about this thing? And it makes me cringe so hard. That is such a good point. It is not their responsibility to educate us. They are fucking exhausted. Okay. Like, they do not have the energy to sit down with you and like explain to your white ass why this is important or what you should be doing. I think I totally agree with you. I think the falls on us. Like we need to be doing that. We need to be looking into these things, reading books. There's so many freaking books out there on this topic. Yeah, we do not need to put this emotional burden on them.
Right. I also I've been struggling a little bit too with like getting caught up in the aftermath and being distracted. I found myself getting so angry um about this 17-year-old kid, Kyle Rittenhouse, the person who shot two people
Yep.
and injured a third at the protests in Kenosha, like 3 days after
Yep.
Jacob Blake was shot. And that whole incident, man, I was reading an article that had more details about it. How he walked after the shooting, walked towards police officers with his hands in the air, and
Yeah.
nothing happened. They didn't stop him. Nobody, you know, came and
Yep.
handcuffed. Like nothing happened. There's just no way that if he'd been a person of color, that he would have frickin' walked away from that. So
Oh my gosh.
just so much anger in like towards like the situation and how it happened and just the stark contrast between the two
Yes.
stories of Kyle Rittenhouse and Jacob Blake. Um
Yep.
so I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not something to be glossed over. Like obviously this is a huge problem and story in and of itself, but I almost feel like right now this story about this kid and what's the aftermath of it and what's happened now and how he's been arrested um, is sort of overshadowing the
Mhm.
point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's taking attention away from the real. I mean, this is a huge issue for sure. And that kid's probably also racist. And I think there were things that came out about that. But I totally get what you're saying. Like, the issue at hand right now is for us to be supporting um, people of color, to be standing in solidarity with them, not to be getting into arguments about whether or not this kid, was wrong or right or whatever. Like what I'm hearing you say is that there's a lot of other noise that's trying to creep in and it's deterring from like the Black Lives Matter movement and the racial injustice that we're trying to fight.
Right. And it's turning into this argument about this byproduct of the event. And like people are, taking sides, of course, like he was supposed to be like he was like defending a business or something. Um and so everyone's like, guns are awesome and I get to defend myself, self-defense, yay, the whole like, Second Amendment
Yeah.
NRA shit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
versus like, why was this 17-year-old white kid allowed to prance around carrying a semi-automatic weapon without being stopped? I mean, there were officers crawling all over the place. Like, and no one
Yeah.
ID'd him. By the way, it's illegal to open
Mm-hmm.
carry in Wisconsin, um, under the age of 18 and he was underage.
Yes.
So he was breaking the law. Nobody checked. I heard a story that he was even thanked by a police officer and handed a water bottle.
What?
Yep.
Oh my God.
So I was finding myself getting really into this narrative and getting like irate about this. Um, but let's not forget that Jacob Blake is in a fucking hospital right now, paralyzed and handcuffed to his hospital bed when he can't even walk. So let's like
Yeah,
not forget that this insane thing is happening. Like,
exactly.
seriously, what is the point of handcuffing somebody to the bed when they're paralyzed? What the fuck?
Everything's just, this whole thing is just so backwards and it's infuriating. But yes, your point is very well taken. Let's not forget that. Let's keep the attention on him because he deserves that attention. And we need to like keep this conversation going. But yeah, I totally agree with you.
So in in doing some of this research and reading about the things that are happening, every freaking hour, every night, every day, there's new developments. I don't think this is going to stop anytime soon. I hate I hate this, but I know that this isn't the last person of color who's going to be shot in the back by a police officer. I hope that some change, some good comes from this. Um, but something that's keeping me going is that um, I was thinking back to when Colin Kaepernick took a
Mm-hmm.
knee for the first time and everyone
Mm-hmm.
lost their fucking minds through this simple physical action at a
Yeah.
sporting event. Um, and looking back at that and how his career was like over after that, and he lost his endorsements and sponsorships. He was basically blacklisted. And then
Mm-hmm.
like fast forward to now where not only is the entire NBA supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, they're
Yep.
wearing apparel that says all these things very clearly. It's a huge like visual focal point.
Yep.
They are all kneeling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the Milwaukee Bucks went on strike and started a fucking movement themselves. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
basically fell in line and also sat out their games. Even the Packers canceled a practice, the Green Bay Packers, the football team. Um, and you might think like, so what? But like, it's kind of a big deal. That
Absolutely.
like the sports world is showing support, and it's not really the league, but the players that are
Yeah.
actually taking these actions, and I just think that is amazing.
It's incredible. And they're doing this in the middle of a fucking pandemic, which, by the way, is still fucking going
Oh,
on.
yes.
And people are putting their lives at risk to protest this racial injustice because it is that important. Um, but yeah, they're doing this in the middle of a pandemic. And what makes me laugh, this is kind of mean, but I'm kind of reveling in the fact that like all these white racist people who love sports and like couldn't wait for sports to come back on TV and all this shit. Like now it's like, haha, jokes on fucking you because we're still in a pandemic. You still can't go to your sporting events and you can't watch them on TV either because you're an asshole. So that makes me a little happy in a very dark way.
I am here for it.
Yes.
So I just wanted to read this quote from this essay written by Dr. Ronald Bell. He's a pastor. I believe he's living in Minnesota now. Um, but it kind of made me want to cry. Um, so he said, "My city is burning, but not in the way the media is showing. Did you see the fire? Not the one burning down the precinct, but the one burning in the hearts of the wounded in my community. The grieving mothers and grandmothers recalling the voice of our dear brother George Floyd as he called for his mother while taking his last breath. The burning of the hearts of we who wept when our governmental leaders refused to arrest the murderer of this wicked and inhumane deed. Did you see that fire? I think you were so busy looking for a riot that you missed the gathering of the grieving. I think you were so busy looking for looters that you missed the lament and heartbreak of a community. I think you were so busy looking for trouble that you missed the tragedy of systemic racialized trauma on the bodies of Black and brown people. Tonight, tomorrow, and even the next day, I beg of you, look again.
Wow. That's really powerful.
Yeah, and if you just do a quick Google search, Dr. Ronald Bell, he's written a lot of like poetry and essays and blogs and things that were
That's
really
incredible.
insightful. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can close with that because there's nothing we can say that'll top that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. So to sum up, we like to do our little what are you livid about and what are you living for? And given how sort of dark this one's been, I thought I'd keep it light this time. So,
Yes, do it.
so Julie, I am livid that I have this patch of pimples on my chest that has literally been there for like 2 solid months.
Oh my God. That is incredible.
And what happened was it got really hot and I went camping and
Yeah,
I didn't like, shower because we were camping. And this
right.
enormous fat red pimple appeared. And that was the beginning. And I've tried like everything. Like I've been putting fucking Clearasil on this shit. I got some like special like wipes. Like they're
Nice.
soaked in this like supposed to be this like magical elixir that's supposed to like erase your pimples. And I swear to God, they're only slightly smaller.
Wow. That
Months,
pimple is,
months.
it's ready to stay. It's staying.
I'm really pissed
Wow.
about it. I'm really pissed.
I'm very sorry. I feel like if that was me, I would have just tried popping all of them by now.
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did? Okay. And they're still not going away.
No,
Holy shit.
I think it's like a disease.
Oh my God. That sounds like you should probably get it checked out.
I would if it wasn't a fucking pandemic.
Oh my God. Wow, I needed that laugh. Thank you. Wow, keep me posted on the patch of pimples. I'm very curious.
Oh, I will. I'm sure you all are fascinated. Really. I'll make sure I'm posting regular updates about that.
Well, if we're talking about gross things, this just popped in my head. What I'm livid about is the fact that my mouth and my upper lip just sweat profusely, especially when I have a mask on. And yesterday I went to the dog park with my puppy and I wore a mask the entire time and I just had like literal sweat dripping from underneath my mask. And it really pissed me off and it was very uncomfortable. And eventually I couldn't, like, I didn't even wipe it off. Like, I just let it dry on there. It was absolutely disgusting. Like, I'm pretty sure I licked my lips at some point and I was like, what the hell is going on in there? Like, it was not good.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So there's your 2 gross, disgusting hosts for you this week. What are you living for this week, Jane?
Sorry, that was great.
Thanks.
I'm living for Trevor Noah
Love him.
of The Daily Show.
Love
I
him.
think that he is a fucking delightful person. I think he's gorgeous. I think
He's
he
so
is
cute.
hot AF. Um,
Oh,
and he's been honestly kind of a rock for me through the pandemic of like he's able to deliver the news in a way that doesn't make me want to like stab something.
yes.
He
He is really
summarizes,
good at that.
yeah, he's so good at it. He summarizes kind of what's going on. He has really insightful and like eloquent things to say, and he's funny.
Yes.
So I love
I should
him.
start watching him. Yeah.
I love
Like, I
him
watch
so
too much of the
much.
regular news. Yeah. I need to watch something like that because I watched way too much of the regular news and it just makes me really depressed.
My husband, is somehow it's, like, cathartic for him to have, like, CNN on or, like, MSNBC
Mm.
or whatever,
Oh, God.
and I can't do it. Like,
No,
even just hearing it drone in the background, I'm like, "I gotta put earbuds in or something." Like, I can't stand it. Somehow he just kinda has it on in the background and, like, gathers his information, and I'm, like, having a fucking emotional meltdown listening to that shit.
me too. That's my husband did that the other night. He put it on and we were watching it and I literally was like begging him to turn it off because I was just sobbing the entire time. Like I I can't handle it.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Hardcore. What are you living for, though, Julie?
Um two things. Can I do two things?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Will not turn down multiple
Okay.
happy things.
So number one is these videos called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Have you seen those?
Ooh, no, but it sounds familiar.
They're Yes, they're really good. Emmanuel Acho does them, and he basically brings on guests to each video, and he just has a conversation about race. And he's a black man, and the way I mean, similar to what you were saying about Trevor Noah, like so eloquently put. Like everything he says is so eloquent, and he uses these incredible like stories and metaphors to explain what's going on, and it makes so much sense. And I can start using those same metaphors to like explain shit to people when I feel like I don't have the words for it. For example, he did a video, I think this was in a video with Matthew McConaughey actually, where Matthew McConaughey was on there with him. They were kind of talking about race together, which is really cool. And Emmanuel Acho said something about like he was explaining the Black Lives Matter movement, and he was basically saying like, you know, COVID is at the front of our minds right now for a reason because it's going on right now. And like, it's not to say that other illnesses and chronic issues aren't important, that they don't matter. Like, cancer still matters, AIDS still matters. We should definitely be doing research into that. But right now, what matters most is COVID-19 because we're trying to fight this pandemic, right? And so he drew a connection between that and Black Lives Matter. He's not saying that other lives don't matter. The only thing is that right now, Black lives are really impacted by all this shit that's going on in our society. And that is a pandemic in and of its own. And we need to deal with that pandemic too. So the way he explained, like he's got a lot of gems like that in his videos, but the way he explains shit is just so good. So I've been watching his videos, and they're incredible. And then the other one that I'm living for is a podcast. I think it's from NPR, I want to say. It's called Nice White Parents. Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Oh my God, it is so, so good. Like you would love it. It's basically talking about what happens when white parents come into urban schools, when they start trying to integrate schools with white kids and white parents get involved. How does that change the landscape of the school? How does it change, you know, the culture there? And really, it's not, I mean, there's a lot wrong when white parents come in. And there's a lot of culture and like cultural and racial issues that come up when white parents kind of insert themselves. And it's just, it starts with that. And then it kind of takes a look at just segregation and segregation of schools and how that started and how it's still maintained to this day, and why integration might not be the best, you know, answer to our problems right now. It's just really, I haven't finished the series. I think I'm on episode 3, but it is so good and it's like binge worthy.
And as a quick aside, I didn't realize this, but when they were starting to integrate schools, all teachers of color were fired. And so we are still trying to rectify that because the proportion of white teachers to teachers of color is so disproportionate. It's nuts, and that really affects the entire educational system and
Absolutely.
perspective. And it's just something that I never thought of. And of course, like people didn't want their kids being taught by a black person back when in the 19 whatever,
Right.
I don't know date.
Right. 19 something.
when
Yeah.
that started
I mean,
happening.
to be honest, even today, I feel like there are still people even today who don't want their kids to be taught by Black people. And I used to teach in public schools for a while, and it never occurred to me that literally all my coworkers were white, and we were teaching in predominantly Black schools. Like one school I taught in was all Black. The other school I taught in was half Black, half Hispanic. Some white kids, not a lot. But yeah, all of the teachers were literally white.
Right.
And it's like, that is such a fucking problem.
Oh my God. Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I
Anyway.
love those two things you mentioned. I'm definitely going to look both of those up. We will post the links to those as well in our notes.
Yes. We'll do that.
So you too can benefit from these.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I feel like we should probably wrap up, but I know that there's a lot more to say about this topic. But I'm glad we had this conversation. So yeah, we might do a part 2 at some point. We'll definitely be back with more episodes.
Yeah, and it just helps me when I think about this on my own, I feel pretty hopeless. But talking to you about it has really made me feel better and process this and sort of put a hopeful spin on it. I feel a little bit more like there's light at the end of the tunnel somehow, that we're just all kind of trying to work on this and work on ourselves.
Yes.
So I feel like I'm in a more hopeful place now after having this conversation with you. So thank you, Julie.
No, thank you. I definitely do too. I promise I won't treat you like those white bitches at the bachelorette party.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We will be back soon with more episodes.
Whoop.
Bye.
Bye.